Good evening, and thank you for coming. My name is Hugo Villar. I'm the Associate Dean for Professional and Continuing Education at UC San Diego Extension. We will be talking about transitioning with an engineering degree. How do you go from one industry to another with your engineering degree? To moderate the panel, we have today Matt Sanford. Matt is the Director of Economic Development for San Diego Regional Economic Development Corporation, a non-for-profit organization mobilizing business, government, and civic leaders to maximize the region's economic prosperity and global competitiveness. In this role, Matt oversees the economic development team, which supports business expansion, attraction, and retention in San Diego's key industries. So you can see that Matt is very much into the topic that we will be discussing this evening. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. So yeah, in that role, and saying the Economic Development Director at an Economic Development Corporation is a bit repetitive, I think. But we work day in and day out with businesses, large and small, throughout the region, really focused on the innovation economy to better understand the challenges that they're having to operating here or potentially operating here in the case of attracting companies to the region. In doing so, there are two critical things that always come up. One is access to capital, and I don't think anybody's a stranger to that. And the second, and oftentimes even more important than the capital, is talent. And it's at all levels. It's technical talent, it's managerial talent, but businesses need the right talent to thrive and to grow. And it's what we have in San Diego generally. I mean, these gentlemen on stage here are case in point to that. However, there's never enough. There's enough to fill the folks that are currently in jobs, but even with current demand, there's always a need to have more talent and more importantly, talent that is equipped with the right skill sets. And I heard a question in the last panel that talked about job titles and whether you're qualified or not. I know most employers that we talk to are really focused on skill sets. So that, the more that you're able to articulate your skill sets, it makes you more adaptable across different industries. One of the things and why I think this panel is so interesting for us is that we also have some larger companies in town, Qualcomm being an example, that people sometimes think, well, if I don't have a job at Qualcomm, well, then I don't really have a job in San Diego. And we want to change that perception. We want to show that there's a healthy ecosystem here where people can have some mobility between jobs and between careers. And it's important to us, it's actually important to Qualcomm as well to demonstrate that and to have that healthy flow of people both able and actively moving around a little bit, because it brings different perspectives into companies that may not have been there previously, and we want to make sure that we foster that type of interaction. So that's a quick explanation of why we focus on talent. Now in this panel we're talking about changing careers, and whether that's early in a career or mid-career. We have three great panelists to talk about very different perspectives in how career transformation has happened in their unique instances, and then we'll dive into that. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists, and we'll go down the line here, to introduce themselves, give a bit about the role that you're in now, and when you're talking about a career transformation, what has that meant for you personally?
Okay, Eric Vloot. I work for Cubic Transportation Systems here in Kearny Mesa, San Diego. My background is actually, I have an engineering degree, computer science in my case, and I've had change sort of happen throughout my career, including my university career. So I'll highlight them real quick just as part of the introduction. So I chose to go study applied mathematics. That was a mistake. So that was change one. I went into computer science. Then later on, and I went to school in Holland, in Amsterdam, and the system is a little bit different there. So we choose a specialization towards the end of your studies. And I chose business, which was another change, right? I was on a computer science track and sort of figured out that I didn't want to be a computer engineer. Or software developer, or whatever it might have been. Then rolled into an internship that got me familiar with product management, that was a change. I didn't see that coming. I'm pretty sure I didn't know what that was at the time. Started out in consumer electronics in product management, and so that's sort of a B2C kind of model, and then did a startup. That was a change. Went back to consumer electronics, and then later changed to the financial technology industry, so accepting payments and retail and those kinds of things. Spent 12 years doing that. That's a B2B type business, still dealing with consumers and payment acceptance, credit cards, swiping debit cards, entering your PIN, those kinds of applications. And then 2 years ago, I decided I got a call from a recruiter here for this job at Cubic, and that's more of a B2G, business to government type role. Still in product, so the one constant in my professional life is product management. But I've changed industries, I've changed roles, I've changed into challenges that have been interesting and challenging. So change has been a constant throughout my career, and hopefully we can chat a bit about that.
Thanks. Watson?
Hi, this is Watson. I'm right now the co-founder and one of the engineers at IRA. A little bit about me, I went to my grade school in Beijing, went to an international school, and then through Beijing, I went through the Beijing 2008 Olympics, saw the change there, and then I came to UCSD in 2011 for my undergrad in electrical, and then that was a change through just geographically, culturally, even mentally, almost. We could talk about that later. So in my junior year of college, before that we did a lot of internships with software and chips, a lot of undergrad research involving hardware, but it started in my junior to senior summer. That's when the idea of IRA came along, and then I initially started off doing a lot of software development. We really had a need to push for a POC. At that moment, at the beginning of startups, it's all about POC, getting your first traction through the door, getting it to investors, proving that you have a product that customers want. After the first year or so, as you grow the team, we luckily found our first seed investors, got some investor money, not made money. And then that's when we started hiring our first few engineers. And that's when, as someone who's in the very beginning, you have perfect experience, perfect knowledge about the current technology that you've built, that you've worked with. How do you architect and start to distribute the work across many, many teams? Because as you all know, if you want to go fast, you go by yourself. If you want to go far, you have to do it in a team. Now I'm slowly transitioning to a role of more managerial. So software to architect to managerial. The reason for that is we're hitting this sweet spot of we went from 6 engineers to 20 engineers over 2 months. How do you, when you're not in the chaos in a startup, there's always chaos everywhere you go, especially in startups. When you hit that chaos, if you're not in the chaos, you are going to see chaos. And how do you manage that chaos? How do you manage the constant development speed across a POC to production application? That's where I am right now.
And Peter.
Hi, I'm Peter Chung. I'm a senior quality engineer at NuVasive. We're a medical devices company specializing particularly in technologies for spine surgery, and I specifically work on software-related products. So how did I end up there? Well, I've meandered quite a bit through a variety of career, periods. Right after undergrad at Northwestern, I started off in medical devices in a cardiovascular field. So worked as a quality engineer there for 3 years, made a transition back to academia, and that initially started off as a lab technician position at Caltech. That was supposed to go on for 2 years, but as grants go, it didn't get renewed, and so they laid off about 20 lab techs right after about 5 months after I started. So at that point, it was kind of suddenly I had to find a new plan, right? And I think that's kind of, just to digress a little, I think that's part of, this whole career transition thing is sometimes it's out of your control, right? And sometimes you're trying to explore a path that'll work, or that will allow you to leverage a skill set that you have. But I think part of it is, you have to embrace that change. And so, in that moment, I was like, well, I still want to be in academia, apply to grad schools in a very rushed way because deadlines for applications had already passed for most places. And then ultimately I ended up at UCSD for a PhD program in nanoengineering, in particular focusing on 3D bioprinting. In that process, though, I realized that I was more interested in systems integration and actually developing the instrumentation that I was using for research and developing software. And software has never been a formal, any formal training or education that I've had, but has always been like a lifelong hobby. And as I was working towards that, I was also exploring other opportunities, kind of going into my PhD program, I knew that I wanted to end up in academia or in industry after I got out. And so with that, I kind of explored my options and luckily found a great position in Evasive where it kind of melded my skill sets together. And right now I'm actually concurrently enrolled. So, all but dissertation, as is often the case. But I think a lot of this going back and forth, it helps build a lot of your experiences that are transferable.
All right, thanks. And let's dig into that for just a second. And anybody can respond, but maybe we'll start with Peter. So you mentioned that you're not always preparing yourself for a career transition. Sometimes it's something that just comes up quite suddenly. How do you either prepare for or react to, or what advice, looking back, would you give to people that are either going to be thrust into a situation or maybe thinking proactively about that?
Yeah. So I think your natural inclination is like panic, like what do I do now? And so I guess first step is kind of like, gather yourself, it's okay, it's going to be okay. Plenty of people have been in this situation before. And it's kind of a good point where you can take inventory of what are your capabilities, what are your experiences, and think about how, one thing you have to do or you're forced to do in that situation is to kind of broaden the scope of, what may match well for you as far as your next career goes or your next step goes. And so I think, especially if you've been in a particular narrowly focused field, or if you've mainly been in academia, it's kind of frightening to veer from that path, right? And so I think part of it is just being open to opportunities. You don't necessarily have to feel like you have to know that this is what I'm going to commit to. And I think being open to that exploration, discovering how transferable your skill sets are, and reaching out to other people, right? To connections you have in a variety of fields. That way you can get a sense of what type of talent people are looking for.
Thanks. Either of you guys have any input on that?
Yeah, so I think I could speak to that, that constant put in a position, because the moment, because I'm not a US citizen, the moment I got my UCSD offer letter, is it offer letter? It's not offer letter. When I got my UCSD acceptance letter, thank you. When I got my acceptance letter, that's where you start your F1 visa, right? That is, so from the day you get your F1 visa to the day you graduate, and plus 90 days, if you don't find a job then, you're going home, right? So since day one, you get to UCSD, it's all about how do I trick a big company into hiring me so that I could stay here. So a lot of the work becomes, do I double down on my credentials? Do I double down on my technical skills? Do I double down on my networking? But I think I would like to, double click on that open-mindedness. If you're open-minded on what kind of work you're allowed or you're open to do, not just in the country that you want to work at, but also your home country, I think keeping both options open, keeping both channels live with your networking, I think that really helped me with my financial future and also my sanity, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I'll hook in on two points. One is risk and the other one is passion, right? Every commencement speech ever given, always says follow your passion, and I think that's true. I think you got to go do what you want to do because you'll be miserable in any job you don't enjoy, and the job you might not enjoy because of the work you do, the people you work with, the area you work in. I probably wouldn't do well in a job I love in Anchorage, Alaska, right? So that's going to make a difference. Where do you want to be? Who do you want to work with? And what's the job you're going to be doing? But also take some risk. I think we overthink these transitions sometimes. Some people underthink them, admittedly, but some people overthink them as well. And you got to sort of think about what you have to lose, right? To go try something new or different for a couple of years. I mean, I think in the US in particular, at most levels of jobs, you don't sign contracts, so it's at-will employment, so it's not like you're locked in. I think you have a moral obligation to the company you join who's investing in you to stick around long enough to contribute, which, I would express in a handful of years. But that's kind of it. I mean, the risk is low enough that you can try new things and follow that and follow your passion, and you will always need to consider where you are in your life and what risk is appropriate. If you're supporting 10 children, then maybe not. But if you're in the earlier stages of your career and you're interested and passionate about something, you have an opportunity, no matter where it is, as long as it's safe and interesting to you, go try it. Don't overthink transition too much, because I can guarantee it'll always lead to, well, not always, but it'll often lead to places you didn't previously plan for. So take the opportunity and try it.
And I imagine that risk can somewhat be mitigated if you're both confident yet realistic in the skill sets that you have, so you know where you might be well suited to go, or if you are passionate about a transition to something totally new, you can at least begin to think about what steps you would need to take to get there. On that a little bit, in taking some of those steps, Watson, you mentioned that there's a lot to a transition beyond just changing jobs. Go into maybe a little bit about what that was like for you and how other people can think through more holistically a transition like that.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, I'm going to sidetrack a little bit. There'll be like a circle going on. The biggest thing that when a lot of people ask me is like, hey, you're a co-founder, you're barely out of college. What does that mean? And they ask me a lot of business questions, and I'll be like, you should talk to my other co-founder with tens of years of experience. And I think the biggest thing about that is just because you have your title of co-founder, just that, it doesn't necessarily mean you automatically have the skill set of someone who's like sitting next to you, Eric, with like tens of years of experience. But what that mindset that you really have to know is, that really worked for me at IRA, was what I could contribute with my current skill set that no one else can contribute at the moment. So with me and our 3 other co-founders, my biggest asset was time. I thankfully don't have 10 kids yet. We could talk about that after this. I could definitely put time, and and a really fast reader, so I could read all the technical docs that you want, RFCs, and then I could crank out the prototype overnight. So if that's my asset, how do I take that work away from the people, from my co-founders, which are skilled in business, skilled in product development, let them do what they're best at, so I could do what I'm best at. If that answers the question.
No, that's great, yeah. So shifting gears just a little bit, I want to start with Eric this time, since you've had a few transitions in there and a few either potential or realized career paths. So obviously a lot of resources in play there, whether it's academic and retooling skill sets, or perhaps just learning on the job. What resources, looking back, were available to you, or maybe that you would recommend that others seek out if they're thinking about this, whether it be a total career transition or just moving up in a company?
Wow, that's a tough one. So I'll speak to my own experience first. If you hadn't figured it out, the common thread throughout my thank you for dating me, tens of years of experience, 60, 70, whatever it is, is product development, product management. So that's been the transferable skill, at least the one that shows up on a resume, and then a soft skills and stuff like that. I've had to learn on the job. There really wasn't I had to learn what product management was out of college, and so to figure that out over time. At the time, I had to learn about communication technology. We won't get into the details of the products, but into communication technology, what consumer marketing looked like. Then later, I had to figure out how the payments industry works. And, you know, I might have gone to a boot camp, read a book or two, talked to a bunch of folks, but you kind of have to be dynamic enough to figure that out on the job. Because once you have the job, then you still have all this stuff to learn. You don't learn it, apply for the job, and then you hit the ground running on day one. That's not always how it works, right? Making sure you're properly prepared for, at least at the interview level, for a transition like that, making sure that you identify sources of information, whether those are paid boot camps or conferences or seminars or online reading, book reading, whatever it might be, and then keeping up with a given industry. And that's where that passion comes in, because you will fail trying to get into something new that you don't care about, right? I mean, nobody is good at that. If you find something you can find a passion angle on, you're going to be okay, because you're going to want to learn about it during work hours, after work hours, so on and so forth. And then I did it again with transportation. I knew very little or nothing, other than growing up in Europe, where, you know, I took a bus every day. No one knew very little, which we don't do here, it seems. But I knew very little about transportation, so I had to learn that too, and I'm still learning. So I think you identify your career path, your common transferable skill, and you hook everything else off of that.
How do you brand yourself as being ready to be able to move into another field or a new job that quickly?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, luckily I've had some experience now dealing with that situation. You know, I think one thing that if you haven't gone through, you know, this whole process very much of like searching for a job in industry, or if you've been kind of in a very linear path through academia or what have you, it's hard to get a sense of, you know, what do I bring to the table for anyone? How do I go about knowing if a position makes sense to me, right? And I think this question was brought up earlier about, well, you know, you have these postings that say 5 to 10 years of experience necessary. And really, you know, it may say something specific to that field, but in reality, you know, just as Eric mentioned, you don't know pretty much 90% of what you're doing at your job until you get there, right? I mean, literally, I've been at NuVasive for a year. Literally every day, I'm constantly learning something. A lot of times, learning what I didn't do right. But you know, a lot of it is, you know, when we talk about 5 to 10 years of experience or something like that, it's really about experience solving problems, experience using an analytical skill set. And you know, I think anyone here, right? You've been through, you know, very complex projects. You've dealt with, you know, teams, and you've been in working on things that require a lot of intense focus and dedication, and you know, carefully planning out whatever you're doing. And I think that's what's essential. That's how you brand yourself, is like you're able to, you bring that experience to the table, and the context is kind of, you know, that's just the outer shell. Like you don't really, you can apply that to a variety of fields. And that's a great thing about engineering in general, right? You develop an engineering skill set, and whatever field you pick, it's all applicable. And I think that's, you know, that's the thing you learn in undergrad as an engineer. At least that was highly stressed for us, is, you know, throughout all these fields, the way you approach problems, it's very similar. And so I think that's the thing to focus on. That's the thing that you can brand about yourself when you're looking at a variety of options.
So Watson, to you, Ira is a relatively small company, although growing quickly, and so it's not necessarily a career transition from company to company, but even in a smaller company, you're finding a path through to change that, and it may be a little different since you're one of the founders. But how do you position yourself to really take on new roles within a company and demonstrate new value to folks you've been working with for years, not just moving companies, but increasing your value within the company?
Yeah, so the question I always ask myself is, if I'm not doing this, who could do this? So in the very beginning of the stages, recruiting, right? You're not gonna spend your investor dollars on an HR that's just, you could contract it out, but you're not gonna go out, reach out to UCSD, find your engineers, find your sales, find your agents. So I was looking around the room before, it wasn't too hard. It's only 4 of us. If my co-founders are not actively looking for engineers, it's up to me to see what resources I have as a UCSD graduate. What resources can I have to find the engineers and the resources that I need to push the product? So a happy Watson at the end of the day would be like, if there's a problem in the day, and I was able to solve it through some means, that is a happy Watson at the end of the day. So whether this be an engineering issue, be a hiring issue, be a business issue, that's how I would approach it. I think, I'm trying to find an example. I think over the course of probably 6 months, I've looked at over like 400, 500 applicants for interviews. And this, in the beginning, it was pure, and in the beginning, it was not just engineering. You're interviewing sales, you're interviewing your first VP of sales. All those come together. And as long as they can help you solve an individual problem better than me, is usually my benchmark. It's not too high. Then that's when I know like as a company, we're heading towards the right direction.
Okay. Any other thoughts of moving within a company? All right, so the last question that I have, and then I want to open it up to the audience here, is, hopefully everybody's here listening to this panel because there's at least something maybe in the back of their mind or currently where they're thinking about some sort of career transition. What advice or encouragement would you give to folks? I think the risk in addressing that up front is an interesting one. What else is there that people can leave here thinking, oh, that's something I can take home with me?
So, yeah, we've stressed this point of being open-minded and exploring options. So I don't want to necessarily belabor that point. I think part of it is also, if you have an alumni network, if you, when I was exploring options as I was going towards the end of my PhD program, there were great opportunities, similar to this one, right? So you're doing well by just even being here at this event, but there were other workshops and ways for people to meet people who are in similar situations, right? And you do activities or workshops or just ways to do an inventory of your abilities, of your true interests. And I think finding tools like that as well, it's important so that you don't feel like you're dealing with this all on your own. You can relate to others who are having this experience and allow yourself to branch out and find new opportunities even through that mechanism. So I think look at all the other resources you have around you as well. So look at all your other networks, your connections, alumni, past jobs you've had, of course. So I think that's what I would advise.
Yeah, so I think I've been in San Diego about 7 years, including my undergrad. So not including undergrad, probably like actual work, probably 3-4 years. And one thing I realized is that I feel like San Diego is very small in terms of the tech community. One thing I noticed is that I could always rely on referrals. So one thing that really worked for me was reaching out to my network, Facebook groups, UCSD groups. There's always someone that knows someone else. And then when it comes to the work part, one of my director of sales, she was a recruiter at San Diego Startup Week too. And she was always, if she didn't know the person, she always knew a referral or recruiter who knew the person as well. So I think one thing that really helped with the transition, and I've interviewed many people in the middle of a transitioning to and from San Diego, within San Diego, is that try very hard not to burn those bridges. Those bridges are the ones that give you the referrals. They're the bridges that help you find your next job. And I guess the takeaway is San Diego's a lot smaller than I thought it was.
In a good way, of course.
In a good way, in a good way, in a good way, yeah.
Be nice to people, I think is the, be polite. No, you know, the passion and risk comments stand, I'll add one more thing, which is more tactical. If you, and I was talking, I won't call the person out, but as somebody, I walked in on a conversation earlier before the session talking somebody that's an engineer and looking to, was looking into product roles or perhaps out of fields. You don't have to go directly into it, right? If you're a double E or you're a software developer, you can find the company you eventually want to work for, take a role that's a lateral move for you, get into that company, be honest about it, say, yeah, I want to be, you know, I want to be double E for a couple more years, or mechanical engineering for a couple more years, I want to contribute that way, I want to learn the company and learn the business a bit. But then I have some career aspirations into HR, product management, whatever it might be, right? Have the conversation at that company about how did I feel about retraining, about having you do a rotation program, et cetera. So don't take the opportunities, weigh the risk, find your passion, but also have a strategy. It doesn't have to happen this month. It can happen 2 years from now, and particularly if you're early in your career, that's completely fine. So strategizing a bit about that is not a bad thing.
I think that's a great point. Even if you're not changing companies, you know, let your supervisor know if you have aspirations to do something differently or something different. Hopefully they're there and supportive of that. And if you are still passionate about the company's work but want to find a new place within it, you're still providing value to that company. So hopefully they'll see that as an asset. And to your point, you know, don't say that you want to do it tomorrow, but you know, put yourself on a path that way. I do want to open it up to any questions from our audience. So if I'm hearing you correctly, how do you transform what may have been an interest or a hobby into demonstrating that you actually have a skill set needed for a position?
Yeah, so I have to make sure I didn't trick my manager who's in the audience into thinking I have skills that I don't. You know, so I think for me, I was lucky enough to have software development and programming kind of be a hobby or be something that's always been augmenting my main, perhaps formal focus. I think in terms of being sure that I had the relevant skills to a sufficient degree, I think a lot of it was just creating a product on my own. And in the lab environment, I had luckily the freedom to do that, to do full stack development for this integrated system. That being said, there wasn't necessarily a lot of I guess per se convincing that I had to do with regard to the skill set. To a degree, you let your resume speak to that, but what's important is, speaking of resumes, is catering your resume to the position you're applying for, right? Having blank resumes don't necessarily help kind of brand yourself to that position. At the same time, also, don't be afraid to apply to something, I guess. Don't automatically lock yourself out of a certain role. And so, because when your application goes in, you may apply for a position in a certain department, but in fact, even in my situation, originally, I think the posting I kind of responded to was for a validation engineer at NuVasive. HR saw my resume, my background, and they actually were concurrently looking for someone with quality engineering experience for a quality engineering position. And on top of that, initially I was, I think, targeted for a 3D printing related project, but based on skill sets, they were like, no, actually this position makes more sense. So, moral of the story, don't prematurely, just filter yourself out of certain roles. If they're tangentially related to your skill sets, or in some way related to your, broadly your area of focus or passion, then just go for it. Worst thing that can happen is they say no, but don't tell yourself no in advance.
All right, so again, just to repeat, so in your management role now, did you have formal training to get there? If so, do you think that helped you? Or to Eric's point from earlier, is it a lot of on-the-job, learning the culture of a company and taking it from there?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a mix of both, I think, in this situation. The training, to me, comes from good mentorship. I think a lot of what I know now and a lot of feeling through is because I had really strong teammates with years of experience in the industry, not just in managerial, but also as a leader in technical skills or anything like that. A lot of times, I think I could probably speak to one managerial stuff I'm going through now. Is like one issue I have is one of my I guess with the people I work with is like, how do I convey all the craziness things, right, going on as a manager with a lot greater, higher visibility of what's going on around them. For one of the engineers who just focus on this one specific burning problem, how do you convey to them your brain dump of you're not, this is what's going on, this is what you're solving. I think what really helped was talking through with my mentors of how they deal with it. And also I put myself, it's not too hard for me to put myself into their shoes because I was literally them a few months ago. And just what kind of things that I want to hear. And I think the key highlights that what I wanted to hear was where my work is impacting the company. So whether we use collaborative tools like Jira, every single Jira ticket that we build ties back to a company goal, whether it's through epics. And I think once they saw that their work has a direct impact to customer satisfaction and consumer revenue as a company goal, then it clicks. And not just their work is better, but the understanding of the work and how to make even better stuff really helped.
I'll answer the question too, but before I do that, you just reminded me of something as far as actionable advice. Get a mentor. We didn't talk about that. I don't think the previous group talked about it. It doesn't have to be the company you work for. It can be anywhere anybody you trust for advice, career advice. I know it's not easy, but you can do it. I have a mentor that works in a different division of the company I work for. I have sort of people I go to for advice that wouldn't call themselves mentors, but that I can call up and say, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? In the career transition, having a mentor that you can get some advice from is a really good idea. So that doesn't have to happen tomorrow either, but if you see opportunities throughout the next 5-10 years and you don't have a mentor, ask somebody, can I buy you lunch every 6 weeks so I can ask you questions? Can I text you once in a while if I have a conundrum at work that I need some feedback on? That's really helpful. Anyway, to answer your question, no, I rolled into it. I absolutely rolled into it. I actually had to think a minute as to when was the first time I had somebody work for me, and it was my first, it was the tail end of my first job, which you may recall was tens of years ago from earlier. It was the late 90s, and we were, long story short, we had an opportunity where there was a few of us left, and so nobody was there to manage the team, and I just went to the big boss at the time and said, I'd love the opportunity to manage this team. It's 3 people, by the way, so it's not, nothing too exciting. And that's how I just learned, and I fell down 15 times, got back up, learned some stuff, learned some more later, et cetera, et cetera. So I never actually went to a management course. I'm not saying you shouldn't, by the way, but I always wanted to do that. I always felt like I could get more done if I was able to achieve more as a team than achieve by myself, obviously. I was always excited about that, but I never went through formal training, and I did okay with it. Probably could have done better if I had done some formal training, but it's a little too late now.
I think you bring up another great point in there, and we've touched on it a little bit, but with that transparency with your supervisor, I know I've had team members that have said, hey, I'm very interested in learning how to manage other people and have some direct reports, and that allows me to understand what their goals are and think through, okay, is this person prepared? And if not, what am I seeing that they need to be working on? And I can have that conversation. In hopefully most, if not all, supportive working environments, that'll be the case. I know not every job and/or career allows for that, but if that's important to you and you want to know that skill set, make it known. It's very hard for somebody to guess what it is that you're hoping to get out of a job or out of a career, but if you are able to have those transparent and open conversations, you may not always get what you want, but you can at least put it out there that that's what you're looking for. I think we'll all stick around for another few minutes, so if you have any one-on-one questions, feel free to come up and ask. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.